by elites from both parties consistently. And, we're talking a lot about the loss of U.S. credibility and how can they ever say anything with a straight face about care of democracy, human rights, et cetera, given the support of Netanyahu's, indiscriminate bombing in Gaza right now. Kissinger really is like the grandfather of that too. We can point to the Iraq War and the loss of U.S. credibility, but it really goes back to him and the total disregard for law, constitutionality, and any sort of care and concern for human rights.
I understand. I just don't think human rights or morality or any of these things really have anything to play whenever it comes to how you should conduct yourself, because ultimately...
How did those words just come out of your mouth? Especially if you happen to be in a high position of power where your decision making can result in mass death, as it did under Kissinger. That's such... How do you think endorse say something like that?
Throughout Latin America, he had the blood of at least 3 million people on his hands, according to his biographer, Greg Grandin. Goes on to quote, "There were few people who have had as much a hand in death and destruction, as much human suffering in so many places around the world as Henry Kissinger," according to veteran war crimes prosecutor Reed Brody. So 100 years, lived a long time, advised literally every president.
Of the last 12, I believe.
Hopeful
Saagar's
presidents
right
like
there.
Hillary Clinton
was quite a look,
a symbol of, both the sort of arrogance and casual disregard for human life, using the entire world as a chessboard and human beings as pawns and playthings on that chessboard. The sort of arrogance that precipitated the war on terror and our misadventures, neocon misadventures in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he is, at long last, Saagar dead.
Well, I'll give my hottest take is I don't think Kissinger was uniquely bad in any respect. If anything, I think he was actually much better than many of the people who occupied top charges in American foreign policy.
That is certainly something you could qualify as a spicy take following what was just revealed to you, if you didn't already know it. Yeah, I mean, sure, there's lots of war criminals, lots of American war criminals. America's done a lot of war crimes, and there's a lot of them, but to be like, well, I mean, was he that bad? If anything, I'd say he was actually pretty good at some of the stuff that he did.
On Vietnam, I've never understood, and I was telling you this earlier, why people like McGeorge Bundy and Robert McNamara were not nearly as reviled as Kissinger. I mean, Kissinger, sure, he expanded the secret bombing in Cambodia, but him and Nixon signed the Treaty of Paris.
But, you're adding a but to the end of that sentence. Wow, holy shit. Brave. Yeah, so you don't get to give someone immediate credit and let alone awards for being like, oh, well, he ended up securing the peace deal that ended up being signed. So, I mean, that's in part, he may have extended the war intentionally, especially in many ways in order to maintain power. That part is also pretty well documented at this point. And that ensuing, extension of the conflict itself did result in the loss of, hundreds of thousands of lives, many of them innocent civilians, and some of them in neighboring countries that weren't even participating directly in the conflict, and one of them specifically chose to be neutral, but he did do some good.
And they got us the hell out of Vietnam. They had the Vietnamization process. Détente was one of the most successful foreign policy things that we needed at the time. The SALT I Treaty froze the insane missile spending that the LBJ and Kennedy Johnson administration were doing. The opening of China remains one of the great master classes in American foreign policy. And my big meta kind of take on why I get annoyed with some of the criticism of Kissinger is the reason why the left hates Kissinger are the reasons that the neocons hated him too, because he refused to incorporate quote unquote morality into his foreign policy. Now, I know that sounds bad, but...
That's definitely what I've heard every leftist say, yes. I particularly despise Henry Kissinger, most likely because he was doing bad things, but he wasn't incorporating enough morality as he was doing them. I wish he was more moral in his, bombing campaigns. That if they were more moral campaigns, surely.
One of the reasons why I've been so against moralistic campaigns around Israel, around Ukraine, is that weaponized empathy is a bad way to conduct relations between states. Kissinger
Well, I don't know. Maybe dehumanizing people and then suddenly mass bombing them off the face of the earth is not a good thing either. And maybe a large part of that is the justification of it that comes from people who don't want to moralize their actions. I mean, how can you justify at this point the death of over, 7,000 children in the Gaza Strip? Europe, and that's just the numbers that have been confirmed. And like over 7,000 children having died horribly, many of them suffocating under rubble as their lungs fill with concrete. Yeah, that you can say is an appeal to emotion, that sentence I just said. But it's also a harsh reality of what is happening. You have to turn off your humanity in order to sit back and be like, well, this is justifiable. Why is this justifiable? Because Hamas is bad, and eliminating Hamas will secure both regions. And it's like, there's not a lot of region to secure right now. Have you looked at what the north of Gaza looks like? It's just literally getting bombed into dust. There's no homes to go back to, and people who try to return to their homes are finding that they're getting shot at. Well, okay, we won't moralize that. Not going to take a side. You know, both sides could be or could not be bad or evil. We'll just objectively take a stance away from that. But if one wanted that to stop, how would one go about proposing that, or getting others and galvanizing others to say, join in a chorus of this should end? This is not a good idea. It's a bad thing. Sorry, can't use the word bad. Don't want to moralize it. This displeases me. Can I say that?
Guarded that along with Nixon and pursued, in most cases, a pretty realist policy and was confined by some difficult political circumstances at the time. So I think people like Rumsfeld, who, by the way, is the person who eventually defeated Kissinger in bureaucratic combat, people like McGeorge Bundy, people like McNamara, many of the, I forget the CIA director's name for Ronald Reagan and all of them, they're far worse in terms of...
So, like, we can agree, at least on this, that they're all really bad. And a lot of Donald Rumsfeld's actions were also horrifying, and they did result in mass death. That none of that is good. And like being like, well, but what about the other monsters? Many monsters work among us, you know, in high levels of government and you know, engage in policies that result in usually thousands of people overseas dying. And that's just a reality of securing America and keeping us the freest, greatest nation on the planet. And then there is a cost. And unfortunately, you know, those radical loony lefties, they're not just willing to accept that. All of them are just like, oh, yeah, stop killing people.
George
you know,
H.W. Bush.
Well, okay, so, but he was the president. And that actually brings me back to Kissinger was not the decider. It was Nixon. It was Ford. It was Kennedy. It was...
Kissinger was...
Again, so he's clearly not read any biographies of Henry Kissinger, because Kissinger did exude incredible influence over the Nixon administration. And in many ways, some of the worst crimes that happened under the Nixon administration were Kissinger's plans being enacted.
Incredibly influential.
Yes, he was
over a long period of time.
Sure.
Kissinger was literally picking out places on the map to bomb,
so
indiscriminately bomb.
Yeah.
And so you and I have a fundamental difference of opinion.
But what about? Yeah, okay. I'm not saying that's good. Hey, let's not moralize this. No one's good or bad. But what about other people who did it? Okay. Fuck them too? don't fucking carpet bomb. They all suck.
And a philosophical difference in terms of conduct and morality. And, you know, I'm opposed to genocide. I'm opposed to war crimes. This man was a war criminal.
Hold on. Hey, Krystal, no moralizing. God damn it. The progressives always moralizing. Why? Oh, what? You got a virtue signal? Oh, yeah, brave stance. You're against genocide. Okay. Well, what about other people, okay, who've endorsed or maybe even kind of promoted or engaged in genocide? There's others. There was others. Why are we so mad at Henry Kissinger?
Two ways about it. Read Christopher Hitchens' book on it if you want to know all the details. But I mean, even just with regard to Vietnam, he intentionally blew up peace talks in an attempt to try to get Nixon into the White House. Then he's rewarded with the National Security Advisor's job. So even if you're just talking about Vietnam, he prolongs this conflict for years and expands it into Cambodia and Laos. The U.S. dropped 540,000 bombs on those places. They slaughtered 150 to 500,000 Cambodian civilians. So, you know.
Yeah, but counterpoint, what about all the people we killed in Iraq? You know, did Kissinger have anything to do with that? Well, actually, he was a foreign policy advisor to a lot of other administrations. No, but come on. That was Donald Rumsfeld. Okay, that was the Bush doctrine. That was the neocons. So, and like, you know, people died.
Is because there's such a level of arrogance, thinking that we can just move these pieces on the chessboard around, not care about any of the humanity involved, and not experience any sort of fallout or blowback
Also, as that article rightly points out, if a lot of the actions of Kissinger later in his life through the founding of his organization worked to start intertwining corporate doctrine with geopolitics of the United States, that's also a massive, massive fuck up that still to this day is one of the reasons why it's like, well, why exactly are these geopolitics taking place in this region of the world when there's horrifying atrocities in other parts of the world? Oh, well, that region is very, very poor, and it doesn't actually have a lot of resources, so to speak. There's not a lot of cobalt under the ground there, so we're not as, I guess, deeply concerned about the ethnic cleansing and genocide that's taking place in that part. Or it's been very handsomely secured by corporate interests. Mining companies in Canada, yes, they've been able to lobby successfully to be able to secure incredible rates at excavation and extraction, even if it does use child slavery to get at it. And most people will ignore it or not talk about it. I mean, some people are mentioning the Congo now, in large part due, I think, to the fact that how can you speak about the genocide in Gaza without speaking of the genocide of the Congo? And when you look into that instance, it's like, well, yes, there again happens to be a lot of corporate interests that I'm sure have worked in hand thanks to the very structure that Henry Kissinger's organization has put forward. We live in an age where, yes, corporations want to have access to the resources they need to produce products that they can then manufacture in other parts of the world where productivity is a lot cheaper, and then ship them over to America and Canada where we can consume them because we live in a consumer society and we don't like to pay a lot of money for all our things because we're all very used to the fact that, yeah, I do enjoy my PS5. I don't want to pay $5,000 for one. I'd rather pay $300 for one. And I'm speaking firsthand that's me. I enjoy the PS5 and I understand that, yeah, okay, there's all these systems in place that make that possible, and there's a whole bunch of different elements that go into the electronics that have been manufactured and excavated in other parts of the world, but it is kind of weird how that works though, right? And then again, it goes back to, well, yes, but it's to secure America's interests. Like, you still, to this day, hear that line said by presidents. Joe Biden has talked about this in his address to the nation when he was speaking and talking about, enabling multiple wars and multiple fronts, being like, yes, we can afford to both, provide Ukraine with weapons that it needs and provide Israel with the weapons that it needs to defend itself. Both are securely in America's interests and securing American foreign policy, benefits abroad. And does any of that have anything to do, again, with any other entities whatsoever? Can we even talk about that? Is bringing that up suddenly moralizing?
From those sort of adventurers. So he did support the war in Iraq. It's not like he was opposed to it, because this is completely consistent with his ideology.
Mistakes.
Now, the neocons may have tried to wrap their ideology in idealism, but the reality is that they were very much consistently trying to pursue their own version of Kissinger's strategy, which is, again, why, in spite of all of his various record of criminality over many decades, he still was feted by elites from both parties consistently. And, we're talking a lot about the loss of U.S. credibility and how can they ever say anything with a straight face about care of democracy, human rights, et cetera, given the support of Netanyahu's, indiscriminate bombing in Gaza right now. Kissinger really is like the grandfather of that too. We can point to the Iraq War and the loss of U.S. credibility, but it really goes back to him and the total disregard for law, constitutionality, and any sort of care and concern for human rights.
I understand. I just don't think human rights or morality or any of these things really have anything to play whenever it comes to how you should conduct yourself, because ultimately...
How did those words just come out of your mouth? Especially if you happen to be in a high position of power where your decision making can result in mass death, as it did under Kissinger. That's such... How do you think and/or say something like that? And yeah, I guess that would explain a lot of U.S. foreign policy. You suddenly have to start treating people like numbers. You have to start using euphemisms. You have to start saying things like, well, yes, there was some cannon fodder and there's the unfortunate loss. Some casualties did occur, yes, but it did secure a large field for us to be able to operate within.
You find yourselves like the Biden administration and all the governments before them backing places like Saudi Arabia and then talking about other things in Ukraine. It's like, it's never going to be consistent. Whenever you live in a...
Well, yeah, the U.S. is a massive hypocrite. Absolutely it is. No one questions that. That's why they don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to posturing or moralizing. But that's not to say that human beings shouldn't do that in general, and that certain human beings have certainly turned off their empathy completely if they're going to associate with these individuals. why not treat these individuals for the remaining parts of their lives as the war criminals they are, actually try to hold them accountable? And if that's not possible, because it's not possible to do to any U.S. Figurehead who's hold a position of power, then at the very least, we as a society can condemn them and be reviled by them and speak of them only in the most hideous of terms, because yes, that is how human beings who have committed mass atrocities and war crimes should be treated.
Messy world, it's going to be messy, so you might as well disregard the pretense. I remember, I think he was caught on one of the Nixon tapes basically saying exactly this. I would just say again, I don't think he's uniquely bad in that period of American history.
I could buy that.
Well, then why not just fuck them all, honestly? If it's like, well, yeah, you did bad shit, but you know, there's this thing. Yeah. There's other people who did shitty stuff too. Are they not too shitty? Yes. Fuck them all.
I think part of why he stands out for people as such a uniquely evil figure is because he is this sort of symbol of the banality of evil that was embraced by presidents of both parties over such a long period of time.
Maybe.
And so, yeah, to say like, oh, well, other American like foreign policy advisors did bad things is like, obviously
yeah,
that's
but to me,
true.
It's way worse.
I mean, I don't know how you get worse than being responsible for like millions of people's deaths and backing genocides in various places and military coups, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but that's my point, is that by this regard, I mean, FDR heavily supported Joseph Stalin. He bailed him out in many respects, and Stalin was responsiple for in many cases more deaths than
against
Hitler.
the Nazis.
That's my point, is that you live in a messy world.
Yeah, I was like, wait, well, as they were fighting Nazism, FDR, he backed Stalin. There was an alliance of sorts.
It's like sometimes we have to make choices about who we support and who we work with, and at the end of the day, and also on 68.
Right. But there's a difference between saying, yes, I'm now going to align myself with, say, a monarchy that certainly is committing a lot of horrifying atrocities, say Saudi Arabia, for example, because that helps secure American national interests and keeps us in oil. That you understand that idea and sentence is different than you personally are devising a plan to do a mass bombing campaign of, again, a country that hasn't attacked you. So you are just going to mass bomb them and kill hundreds of thousands of civilians. And to do that in part sometimes in order to advance yourself politically for your own political goals and aspirations, that's bad. Yes, we can moralize that. We have to, I would say. As a humanity, we have to do that.
It's not 100% confirmed that they blew up those peace talks. Although it is controversial. I actually would still love, if anybody who's alive who was president at that time, we're still looking for total confirmation. I think détente was a great policy. I think SALT I was what this country needed at the time. He bought us a long time before Afghanistan and the eventual rollback people
this is the
who came
Autobahn
under
argument.
Reagan. I mean, he, within the political confines at the time, pursued Vietnamization, signed the Treaty of Paris. He got our POWs out with I think it was part of the negotiation with the eventual Viet Cong. Under him and Ford, they did not, strike back against the fall of Saigon, which was the correct and unpopular policy at the time. So there were a lot of things that they did, which I support, and I think were, on balance, really good for America. Now,
see, there it is. On balance, really good for America. So all the things you've listed, Krystal, I'm not really disputing them, although a couple of them I say haven't been fully proven. But let's just say, okay, fine, I'll grant you that maybe there was mass bombing campaigns, of Laotians, Cambodians, and in that, a lot of people did die. What are you saying, hundreds of thousands? Okay, well, fine, he could be personally responsible for the death of millions, fine. I'm not disputing that, but I'm saying there are some good things also that he did that I agree with, and at the end of the day, it made America better. So,
did he have a lot of mistakes, and did he make a lot of dumb calls, like supporting the war in Iraq? Yes. He also opposed NATO expansion, spoke out for not interfering in Ukraine. He believed very strongly, as I do, in the spheres of influence ideology. So, I don't think he is nearly as bad as many of the people who were dominant foreign policy figures at the time. And I think most of the reason people hate him is because of the resurgence. He became the icon of the devil during the new left, which is what most of the modern left is like a descendant of.
Well,
you do realize in a lot of parts of the world he's seen as one of the largest monsters to ever live. right? Again, if you've gone to the killing fields and you've seen the devastation that massive dictators can ravage upon their people, or what the bombing campaigns have done, or even say some of the weaponry that was used or the chemicals that was used, like Agent Orange and stuff like that during the bombing campaigns and in that area, defoliants to be able to get rid of large vast swaths of the jungle because it's really hard to find Charlie, you know, so why don't we just use these special chemicals now? Hopefully they'll have no lasting or prolonged effects upon generations of children, all that kind of shit. Like, yeah, there's a lot of parts of the world where they rightly view Henry Kissinger as an absolute monster of the highest order.
Because of the expansion of the bombing
It's that,
of
but
Cambodia.
then it's also the long-standing influence. I mean, slaughter in Laos, slaughter in Cambodia, slaughter in Vietnam, slaughter in East Timor, backing Suharto. That caused the death, 200,000 deaths just right there. We were their #1 supplier.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying, why moralize it, you know? Things happen. There's other people. Have you heard about Rumsfeld? Rumsfeld did some pretty fucked up shit too. Rumsfeld wasn't cool.
Of weapons, backing the coup of Allende, and putting in place Pinochet and the brutal deaths that resulted in. So I can't just look at that and be like,
thousands
yeah, but,
of political dissidents arrested, jailed, tortured.
Anyway, my only point is, how many civilians did LBJ, McNamara, and McGeorge Bundy kill in Vietnam?
Like I said, I'm trying to say more. There was lots of other.
But the argument isn't that's good. You can't keep whataboutism in this. Like, you're talking about Henry Kissinger. If you want to talk about the trial of LBJ, do that afterwards. Do Gerald Ford afterwards.
Evil done by other presidents and other national security advisors. But in any case, not going to mourn this man's death after 100 long years of causing death and destruction.
I will give a book recommendation. People should read it. We'll put the book jacket up there on the screen. It's his early years, which is very instructive, not about Kissinger. Great biographies are about the people, their times, and what the foreign policy conversation looked like. It's by Niall Ferguson, or maybe it's Neil. I never know how to say his name. I recommend that people read it. Do not read the Walter Isaacson biography because it's a joke. I believe the only other credible one, if you want from a lefty perspective, is the one that you mentioned there.
The Trial of Henry Kissinger.
Well, that's the Hitchens book. But there's the one that the Yale historian wrote. That you quoted him. I forget what it's called.
Facilitated genocides in Cambodia, East Timor, Bangladesh, and accelerated civil wars in southern Africa, and supported coups and death squads throughout Latin America. He has the blood of at least 3 million people on his hands, according to the biographer Greg Grandin. There were few people who had as much in hand and much death and destruction, as much human suffering in so many places around the world as Henry Kissinger, said veteran war crimes prosecutor Reed Brody. A 2023 investigation by The Intercept found that Kissinger, perhaps the most powerful national security advisor in American history and the chief architect of the U.S. war policy in Southeast Asia from 1969 to 1975, was responsible for more civilian deaths in Cambodia than it was previously known, according to exclusive archive of U.S. military documents and interviews with Cambodian survivors and American witnesses. The Intercept disclosed previously unpublished, unreported, and underappreciated evidence of hundreds of civilian casualties that were kept secret during the war and remained almost entirely unknown to the American people. Kissinger bore significant responsibility for attacks in Cambodia that killed as many as 150,000 civilians, up to 6 times more non-combatants than the United States has killed in airstrikes since 9/11, according to experts. In 1973, the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to Kissinger in his North Vietnamese counterpart, Luc Duthot, for jointly having negotiated a ceasefire in Vietnam in 1973. There is no comparable honor, Kissinger would later write, of the prize he received for an agreement to end the war he encouraged and extended, a pact that not only failed to stop the conflict, but also was almost immediately violated by all parties. Documents released in 2023 show that the prize, amongst the most controversial in the award's history, was given despite the understanding that the war was unlikely to end due to the truce. Tho refused the award. He said that the U.S. had breached the agreement and aided and encouraged its South Vietnamese allies to do the same, while also casting the deal as an American capitulation. During the last 18 years, the United States undertook a war of aggression against Vietnam. He wrote, "American imperialism has been defeated. North Vietnam and its revolutionary allies in South Vietnam would topple the U.S.-backed government in Saigon 2 years later in 1975. That same year, large part due to Nixon and Kissinger's expansion of the war into tiny neutral nation of Cambodia, the American-backed military regime there fell to genocidal Khmer Rouge, whose campaign to overwork, torture, and murder then killed 2 million people, roughly 20% of the population. Kissinger almost immediately sought to make common cause with the genocide. We should tell the Cambodians that we will be friends with them. They are murderous thugs, but we won't let them stand in our way. We are prepared to improve relations with them," he told Thailand's foreign minister. As Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Kissinger spearheaded efforts to improve relations with the former Soviet Union and opened the People's Republic of China to the West for the first time since Mao Zedong came to power in 1949. Kissinger also supported genocide militaries in Pakistan and Indonesia. In the former, Nixon and National Security Advisor backed a dictator who, according to CIA estimates, slaughtered hundreds of thousands of civilians. In the latter, Ford and Kissinger gave President Suharto the go-ahead for an invasion of East Timor that resulted in about 200,000 deaths and a quarter of the entire population. In Latin America, Nixon and Kissinger plotted to overturn the democratic election of Chile's socialist president Salvador Allende. This included Kissinger's supervision of covert operations, such as the botched kidnapping of Chilean General René Schneider that ended in Schneider's murder to destabilize Chile and prompt a military coup. "You did a great service to the West in overthrowing Allende," Kissinger later told General Augusto Pinochet, the leader of the military junta that went on to kill thousands of Chileans. In Argentina, Kissinger gave another green light, this time to a terror campaign to torture, forced disappearance, and murder of a military junta that overthrew President Isabel Perón. During the June 1976 meeting, Kissinger told the junta's foreign minister, Cesar Augusto Guzzetti, that there are things that have to be done, you should do them quickly. The so-called dirty war that followed would claim the lives of an estimated 30,000 Argentine civilians. Kissinger's diplomacy also stoked a war in Angola that prolonged apartheid in South Africa. In the Middle East, he sold out the Kurds in Iraq and wrote to the Grandin, left that region in chaos, setting the stage for crises that continue to afflict humanity. Through a combination of raw ambition, media manipulation, and an uncanny ability to obscure the truth and avoid scandal, Kissinger transformed himself from a college professor and bureaucrat into the most celebrated American diplomat of the 20th century and a bona fide celebrity. Kissinger was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian award, in 1977. In 1982, he founded the Kissinger Associates, an international consulting group that became a revolving door refuge for the top national security officials looking to cash in on their government service. The firm leveraged theirs and Kissinger's reputation and contacts to help huge multinational corporations, banks, and financial institutions, including American Express, Anheuser-Busch, Coca-Cola, Heinz, Fiat, Volvo, Ericsson, and Daewoo broker deals with governments. A key part of Henry Kissinger's legacy is the corruption of American foreign policy making. Matt Duss, a former advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, told Vox, "It is a blurring of the line, if not outright erasing the line between the making of foreign policy and corporate interests." You can also thank Kissinger for that. Kissinger consulted every U.S. president from Nixon through Donald Trump and served as a member of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board from 1984 to 1990 and the Pentagon Defense Policy Board from 2001 to 2016. After being tapped as the head of the 9/11 Commission, families of the victims raised questions about the potential conflict of interest due to Kissinger's financial ties with governments that could be implicated in the Commission's work. Kissinger quit rather than to hand over a list of his consultants' clients. In his 2001 book-length indictment, The Trial of Henry Kissinger, Christopher Hitchens called Kissinger's prosecution for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, and for offenses against the common or customary or international law, including conspiracy to commit murder, kidnap, and torture from Argentina, Bangladesh, Chile, East Timor, to Cambodia, Laos, Uruguay, and Vietnam. Kissinger ducked questions about the bombing of Cambodia, muddied the truth in public comments, and spent half of his life lying about the role in the killing there. In early 2000s, Kissinger was sought for questioning in connection with the human rights abuses by former South American military dictatorships, but he evaded investigators, once declining to appear before a court in France and bolting from Paris after receiving a summons. He was never charged or persecuted for his death, for which he bore responsibility.
In collusion with a fascist criminal group is not anti-communism. It is, in fact, collusion with fascism. But I'd go further and say that I don't greatly care to be lectured on anti-Stalinism by Mao Zedong's best friend, by Leonid Brezhnev's preferred negotiating partner, by the man who told Gerald Ford when he was president that he shouldn't receive Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Oval Office, which Congress thought he should, because it might offend the communists who were Kissinger's friends, by the man who is paid by the Stalinists in Beijing to this day to defend the massacre of their own young people in Tiananmen Square. I won't have it from him that he's doing this against communism. It's just another of the constituents of the gigantic lie that constitutes his reputation. He's a thug and a crook and a liar and a pseudo-intellectual and a murderer, okay? All of those things are factually verifiable.
It's very strong. No, I want to play that one more time. It's one of the best parts of the interview.
The gigantic lie that constitutes his reputation. He's a thug and a crook and a liar and a pseudo-intellectual and a murderer, okay? All of those things are factually verifiable. That he is an anti-communist is a speculation that he likes to encourage.
Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Can you please hit the like and subscribe button and maybe leave a comment? It really does help the videos out. But first, the people who produce everything you see before you and make this entire channel possible: Amazing Fletch, Anna Loves Riley, Ariane McCarthy, Cheryl Alvarez, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hagbard Celine, Multimondi, Omni, Peanut Butter Blondie, Political Puppy, Quiet 185, Rachel K, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Ruby K, Cernicus, Spinach Monster, Stellar Vision, Sebastian DeMel, Trevbot.exe, Words Greenwood, and Travis McClinton. And also, thank you to every other person who helps fund this show. Their names are on the screen right now. It would not be possible without every single one of them. We cannot thank you enough. And if you want to join the Patreon, please come to patreon.com/theserfs and help us exist.